Sergeant Rachel Evans, a wounded Marine veteran, endures cruel mockery from construction workers for her prosthetic leg as she walks to a VA clinic. Their taunts, amplified by a bystander's smartphone, sting deeply, but Rachel's dignity remains unshaken. Unbeknownst to the jeering crowd, a Navy SEAL, Lieutenant James Carter, watches, his anger rising. Suddenly, black SUVs screech to a halt, and SEALs confront the workers, revealing Rachel's heroism in Fallujah, where she saved lives at great personal cost. As the crowd's laughter turns to shame, a question lingers. Will Rachel's honor prevail, or will cruelty linger? Subscribe to celebrate heroes like Rachel, whose scars tell tales of courage. Share these stories to inspire respect and honor in your community. Every view builds a foundation of dignity. Join us. Let's make stories of resilience go viral. The Houston sun blazed without mercy over the sprawling construction site, its heat turning the red dust into a gritty haze that clung to everything. The skeleton of a new high-rise apartment complex loomed in the city's growing suburbs, alive with the clamor of hammers, drills, and the shouts of workers in neon vests. Beyond the chain-link fence, the sidewalk pulsed with life. Office workers rushing for lunch, mothers navigating strollers, elderly locals seeking shade under shop awnings. Through this crowd moved Sergeant Rachel Evans, a 33-year-old former Marine, her dark brown hair pulled into a tight ponytail, her face bearing the weathered resilience of someone who'd seen more than her years suggested. Her worn jeans did little to hide the carbon fiber and titanium that was her prosthetic left leg, its mechanical rhythm a subtle but constant reminder of the price she'd paid. A heavy bag of medical supplies weighed on her shoulder, and in her hand was a faded Marine cap, its edges frayed from years of being her anchor. She walked this path every Tuesday to the VA clinic, her steps deliberate, despite the limp that marked her as different. Inside, she carried a quiet strength, tempered by memories of service, of a life reshaped by loss. As she neared the construction site, the taunts began. "Yo, it's RoboCop," a young worker jeered, pointing at her prosthetic. The foreman, a stocky man with a beer gut and a cruel smirk, saw his chance to shine. "Someone call the GD! We've got a lost one here!" he roared, drawing every eye. The site's noise seemed to hush as workers turned, eager for the show. "Probably faking it for benefits," another voice sneered. "Hey lady, wrong turn to the welfare office," a third added, unleashing a chorus of harsh laughter. Rachel's jaw tightened, her grip on the cap turning her knuckles white. She kept her gaze forward, but each word pierced her, stirring a tempest of anger and grief. Her fingers found her dog tags, their warmth a lifeline to the woman who'd faced combat without hesitation, who'd carried a wounded Marine through chaos, who'd woken to a body forever altered. These men, with their jeers, couldn't know that. They'd never felt an IED's blast, never smelled war's acrid sting, never grappled with a life rebuilt them from ruins. But their ignorance wasn't the worst. It was their joy, the way they turned her scars into a punchline. A young woman nearby, phone raised, filmed with a smirk, whispering, "This'll go viral." Rachel's chest constricted at the thought of her pain reduced to a social media post. The foreman, fueled by the crowd, pressed on. "Bet she never saw combat," he mocked. "Probably tripped over a bar stool." More laughter followed, though some workers looked uneasy, their silence complicity. An elderly vendor at a drink cart shook her head but stayed quiet, fear for her livelihood holding her back. Rachel's heart thundered, but she walked on, her pride unbowed. Dignity, she knew, was hers to hold, forged in the fire of her service. Yet the jeers weighed heavy, threatening to crack her resolve. She thought of her childhood on a struggling Georgia farm, her parents' endless toil, her own decision at 18 to join the Marines, to prove she could be more. 2 deployments had molded her, given her purpose, until an IED stole her leg and her path. Now the mockery echoed the ache she couldn't outrun. Was she still seen, or just a relic of a war no one cared to remember? 50 yards away, a man in a parked car watched, his military tattoos stark against his skin. His jaw clenched as the scene unfolded, rage simmering. He grabbed his phone. "We need to be here," he said, voice taut. "Now." 15 minutes later, black SUVs screeched to a halt at the gate. Navy SEALs emerged, their faces like storm clouds, their presence draining the sight of sound. The workers froze, the foreman's bravado crumbling as his face paled. Who were they here for? And why did the construction crew suddenly look like they'd stared into the void? Rachel had always carried herself with a quiet strength, forged not through loud demands or political maneuvering, but through raw competence honed in the crucible of war. She could hoist a wounded soldier twice her weight onto her shoulders, navigate treacherous, pitch-black terrain with only her instincts, and keep her rifle in working order even as sandstorms raged, blinding those less resilient. Her life had been defined by these moments of grit, moments where survival demanded precision and heart. But the day that shattered her world began like any other in Fallujah, a routine patrol under a relentless sun. Her unit was tasked with escorting a convoy loaded with medical supplies for a civilian hospital, a mission that felt like a small victory in a war too vast to measure. Then the earth erupted beneath their vehicle. The IED, buried deep and cruelly packed with shrapnel, meant to mutilate rather than kill, tore through metal and flesh with indiscriminate fury. Amid the chaos, screams piercing the thick smoke, the bitter stench of burning metal filling her lungs, Rachel crawled back into the wreckage not once, but 3 times. Each trip was a gamble with her life, dragging her squad mates to safety as her heart pounded with adrenaline and dread. On the 3rd crawl, the cost came. Everything below her left knee was gone. But Corporal Martinez, gasping and bloodied, lived because of her. She woke in a German military hospital, a purple heart gleaming on the bedside table, a cold symbol of a future she hadn't chosen. Coming home was a war of its own, one she hadn't been trained to fight. The VA provided top-tier medical care and a prosthetic so advanced it felt like something from a sci-fi novel. But no technology could replace what Rachel craved most: purpose. The civilian world didn't know how to handle a decorated female combat veteran whose slight limp told only half her story. Job interviews turned into quiet humiliations, each one a reminder that her sacrifice was invisible to those who hadn't seen the battlefield. Hiring managers would glance at her prosthetic, their eyes betraying discomfort, and mutter excuses. "We're concerned about your physical limitations." Or, "This role requires a lot of standing, walking, moving." Always something her missing leg supposedly made impossible. Their polite smiles and promises to keep your resume on file stung worse than the rejections themselves. Rachel saw the truth in their averted gazes. She was damaged goods, a liability, a walking reminder of a war they'd rather forget. Each rejection chipped away at her, leaving her to wonder if the world she'd fought for had any place for her at all. Her new neighborhood, where she'd moved to care for her aging mother, offered no refuge. Kids whispered "robot leg" or "Lady Terminator" when they thought she couldn't hear, their giggles slicing through her like shrapnel. Teenagers trailed her to the grocery store, mimicking her gait with exaggerated limps, their phones recording every step for social media clout. The videos spread like wildfire, each view a fresh wound. At the supermarket, security guards eyed her suspiciously, asking if she was carrying weapons, as if her uneven stride marked her as a threat. Store clerks spoke to her slowly, loudly, as if her prosthetic somehow dulled her hearing. The question she dreaded most came with maddening regularity. "What happened to you?" It was asked with a mix of pity and morbid curiosity, as though her life was a spectacle for their fleeting entertainment. Rachel kept her answers short. Military injury. She never elaborated. Most didn't want the real story. They wanted the thrill of tragedy without the weight of understanding. Her silence was her shield, but it couldn't block the ache of being reduced to a curiosity. The whispers about money hurt the deepest. "Must be nice getting those government checks," she'd overhear, as if her sacrifice was a lottery win. "Disability payments for life just for losing a leg. Some people have all the luck." The assumptions burned. Rachel had never applied for full disability benefits, her pride a stubborn barrier. She scraped by on part-time jobs, cleaning offices, stocking shelves, anything that would hire her, using her savings to cover her mother's medical bills. She'd rather struggle than be seen as another veteran milking the system. But the civilian world didn't see her hustle. They saw a stereotype, a caricature of a broken soldier. In her darkest moments, when phantom pain seared through her missing leg and kept her awake, the world seemed to scream that she no longer belonged. She'd trace her fingers over her dog tags, their familiar weight grounding her, and recall her squad leader's words, "Scars mean you survived. Wear them proud." But pride was a luxury she could barely afford when every step reminded her of what she'd lost. The cruelty wasn't new. Construction workers jeering as she passed weren't the first, nor would they be the last. Just the week before, a group of college students had filmed themselves mocking her walk outside a coffee shop, their video racking up thousands of views and hundreds of vicious comments. Rachel had learned to endure it, to let the humiliation roll off her like rain off a soldier's helmet. What choice did she have? But what her mockers didn't know, what they never cared to learn, was the fire she'd walked through to earn her scars. During her second deployment, her unit had run joint operations with Navy SEALs, providing security and medical support for high-risk missions. She'd earned their respect the hard way, proving herself in firefights where gender and politics dissolved, and only competence mattered. Under enemy fire, no one cared if you were male or female, only if you could shoot straight and watch their back. Rachel had done both, her steady hands and unflinching courage saving lives in moments when hesitation meant death. As she walked past the construction workers, their taunts fading into the background, Rachel didn't notice the figure watching from the shadows, their eyes fixed on her with a quiet intensity. The sun beat down on the cracked asphalt where a parked car sat unnoticed by most passers-by. Had anyone paused to look closer, they might have caught the faint outline of a tattoo on the driver's forearm, a trident entwined with an eagle, a silent testament to battles fought and bonds forged in the crucible of war. It was the mark of a warrior, one who'd once stood shoulder to shoulder with others like him, including a woman now standing at the edge of a construction site, her heart sinking under the weight of cruel laughter. At the far end of the street, a low hum stirred the air, growing into the growl of engines as a convoy of black SUVs surged forward. They moved with predatory precision, heading toward an intersection where pride and shame were on a collision course. 15 minutes earlier, the construction site had been alive with the jeers of workers, their voices sharp and mocking, aimed at a lone figure on the sidewalk. Sergeant Rachel Evans stood there, her posture rigid, but her eyes betraying a flicker of pain. She was no stranger to hardship. 2 combat tours, a silver star pinned to her chest, and memories of Fallujah that still haunted her sleep. Yet here, in the civilian world she'd fought for, she was reduced to a punchline for being different, for carrying the invisible scars of her service. The workers' laughter stung worse than shrapnel, each word carving into the quiet dignity she'd clung to since coming home. Rachel's hands curled into fists, not out of anger, but to steady the tremor of humiliation. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the pavement and leave this moment behind. But she stayed, rooted by the same stubborn resolve that had carried her through fire and blood. The roar of engines sliced through the clamor, abrupt and commanding. 3 black SUVs screeched to a halt, their tinted windows reflecting the stunned faces of the construction crew. The vehicles formed a diagonal blockade across the site's entrance, their synchronized stop as sharp as a rifle's report. No horns blared, no voices shouted, just the eerie calm of a unit executing a mission. 7 men stepped out in unison, their movements fluid, almost choreographed, born from years of training in places where hesitation meant death. Dressed in black tactical pants and fitted t-shirts, they wore sunglasses that hid their eyes, but not their intent. These weren't renegades or weekend warriors. They were operators, the kind who navigated war zones with ghostly precision and carried the weight of impossible choices. The laughter on the site died instantly, replaced by a tense silence that seemed to suck the air from the street. Leading them was Lieutenant James Carter, 41, his salt and pepper hair catching the sunlight as he moved with the authority of a man who'd earned his rank through blood and sacrifice. His jacket was gone now, revealing the tattoo on his forearm, a Navy SEAL trident that gleamed like a warning. Several veterans in the crowd, men who'd served and survived, felt their stomachs drop at the sight. They knew what that symbol meant, knew the kind of man who bore it. Carter's boot struck the asphalt with a cadence that echoed his military past, each step deliberate, unyielding. He zeroed in on the construction foreman, a burly man whose earlier bravado had fueled the mockery. Now face to face with 6 feet of trained lethality, the foreman's swagger crumbled. His eyes darted, searching for an escape that didn't exist. Who mocked the Marine? Carter's voice was low, almost serene, but it carried a chilling edge that made the foreman flinch. The question wasn't a request for information. It was a verdict. The foreman's mouth opened, then closed, his earlier confidence evaporating like sweat in the heat. "Look, man, it was just a joke," he mumbled, his voice thick with unease. "No big deal." Carter's eyes, hidden behind his sunglasses, seemed to sharpen. "No big deal," he repeated, his tone rising just enough to reach every ear on the site. The words reverberated, silencing even the distant hum of machinery. "You just humiliated Sergeant Rachel Evans, Silver Star recipient, 2 combat tours, the Marine who saved my team, and 17 civilians in Fallujah." The site was frozen in time. The air was heavy with the weight of Carter's words. The workers, passers-by, even the birds overhead, seemed to hold their breath. One of Carter's men, a younger operator with the restless energy of a caged predator, stepped forward, his hand gripping a smartphone. "We recorded everything," he said, his voice flat but laced with menace, the kind that came from someone who'd seen violence up close and knew its cost. "Your whole comedy routine, every single word." The foreman's face drained of color, his eyes wide with the dawning horror of consequences. In an era where a single video could ruin lives, he'd been caught red-handed, his cruelty preserved for the world to see. Carter's words came again, each one landing like a blow. "That woman you laughed at? She carried 3 wounded Marines out of a burning vehicle while her own leg was hanging by a thread. She stayed conscious long enough to apply tourniquets to 2 others before letting medics touch her." A soft sob broke the silence, coming from a woman in the growing crowd of onlookers. Her hand covered her mouth, tears streaming as she imagined the courage, the pain, the sacrifice Rachel had endured. Nearby, a teenage girl who'd been filming the mockery for her phone fumbled with trembling fingers to delete the clip. Her face burned with shame, the thrill of social media clout replaced by a sickening realization of what she'd almost done. Rachel, still standing on the sidewalk, felt her knees weaken. Her chest ached with a mix of gratitude and disbelief. These men, her brothers in arms, men she'd fought beside in the chaos of war, had come for her. They'd seen her pain, her pride, and they'd refused to let her stand alone. Carter turned to face her, and for the first time his iron resolve softened. The fury in his posture melted into something warmer, deeper, respect, unadulterated and profound. "Ma'am," he said, snapping to attention. His team followed, their movements as precise as a parade drill. "Permission to honor you." The SEALs raised their hands in a crisp, simultaneous salute, not the half-hearted wave of civilians might offer, but the salute reserved for those who'd proven themselves in the fire of battle. Rachel's hands shook as she returned the gesture, muscle memory overriding the storm of emotions in her heart. Her vision blurred with unshed tears, but she held her salute, her chin lifted with a pride she hadn't felt in years. "You saved my squad," Carter said, his voice now loud enough for the entire street to hear, carrying the gratitude of a man who'd survived that day because of her. "When we were pinned down by insurgent fire, you didn't hesitate. You were the one who stood tall." His words weren't just for Rachel, they were a rebuke to the crowd, a reminder of the debt owed to those who'd come home broken, so others could live free. Rachel's heart swelled, the sting of the workers' laughter fading under the weight of her team's loyalty. She wasn't just a veteran or a survivor. She was a hero, and in this moment, she felt it in her bones. On a dusty afternoon at a bustling construction site, Rachel moved with a quiet resilience, her prosthetic leg occasionally catching the sunlight as she navigated the uneven ground. Her Marine cap sat snug on her head, a silent testament to her past, though it did little to shield her from the jeering laughter of some workers who noticed her limp. Their taunts stung, each one a sharp reminder of the sacrifices she'd made, sacrifices they couldn't begin to fathom. Yet Rachel kept her head high, her heart heavy with the weight of memories from a battlefield far away, where she'd sprinted 200 meters across open terrain under a hail of gunfire to reach her squad. She had laid down suppressing fire, her hands steady despite the chaos, ensuring wounded civilians could be evacuated. Shrapnel had torn into her body, meant for the men she protected, leaving her with scars both visible and unseen. She carried those wounds now, not as burdens, but as badges of a life given to others. The air shifted when Carter, a Navy SEAL with a presence that commanded silence, stepped forward. His eyes, hardened by years of leading men through the crucible of combat, softened as they met Rachel's. He reached into his tactical vest, his movements deliberate, and pulled out a Navy SEAL Brotherhood coin, a rare honor reserved for those who'd earned the unwavering respect of the elite. The coin gleamed in the sunlight, heavy with meaning. "You've always been one of us," he said, his voice low but resonant, as he pressed the coin into Rachel's trembling hand. Their handshake was firm, a silent pact between warriors who'd faced the same fire. Rachel's chest tightened, a swirl of pride and disbelief rising within her. For years, she'd buried her service deep, hiding her prosthetic and downplaying her limp to avoid pity or judgment. Now, standing before Carter, she felt the weight of her past lift, replaced by a quiet strength she hadn't known she still possessed. The crowd around them had grown, construction workers in hard hats, office employees on their lunch breaks, shoppers pausing with bags in hand, and residents drawn by the commotion. Phones were out, recording, but the atmosphere had transformed. What had started as a spectacle of mockery now carried the weight of reverence. The jeers faded, replaced by murmurs of awe and understanding. People weren't just watching, they were learning. The construction foreman, his face flushed with shame, stepped forward, his hard hat clutched tightly in his hands. "Sergeant Evans, I'm sorry," he stammered, his voice cracking under the weight of his regret. "I was wrong, I didn't know." Before Rachel could respond, another SEAL, a towering figure with scars snaking up his muscular arms, cut in. "You shouldn't need to know someone's story to show respect," he said, his voice a low growl that silenced the crowd. "It's about basic human decency." His words hung in the air, a challenge to everyone present to look beyond appearances. One by one, the construction workers stepped forward, removing their hard hats in a gesture of respect. A younger worker, his voice barely above a whisper, said, "Thank you for your service. I'm sorry we acted like that." His words were heavy with sincerity, his eyes avoiding Rachel's, as if he couldn't bear the shame of his earlier laughter. An older worker approached, his weathered face streaked with tears. "My son's deployed right now," he said, his voice trembling. "I should have known better. I should have stood up for you." Rachel's throat tightened, her heart aching for this man who carried the quiet fear of a parent whose child was in harm's way. She wanted to tell him she understood, that she'd carried that same fear for her brothers in arms, but words failed her. Instead, she offered a nod, a silent acknowledgement of their shared humanity. Carter wasn't done. He turned to the crowd, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd led men through impossible odds. "This is what a hero looks like," he declared, his words cutting through the murmurs like a blade. "Not a caped figure from a movie or a comic book. A hero is someone who gave her body so strangers could live free. Someone who came home broken and never complained, never demanded recognition, never used her sacrifice for personal gain." His gaze swept over the crowd, daring anyone to challenge his truth. Rachel felt her cheeks flush, not from embarrassment, but from the raw honesty of his words. She'd never seen herself as a hero, only as a Marine who did what was needed. Now, standing here, she felt exposed, yet oddly empowered, as if her invisible armor had been restored. A teenage boy, one who'd been snickering earlier, stepped forward, his phone still in hand, but his expression changed. "Sergeant, can I get a picture with you?" he asked, his voice shaky. "I want to post about real heroes." Rachel, still reeling from the sudden shift in the crowd's demeanor, nodded silently. The boy's request wasn't for clout or mockery. It was genuine, a spark of admiration in his eyes. The construction site, once a place of ridicule, had become a classroom of sorts. Workers shook hands with the SEALs, asking questions about service and sacrifice, their curiosity earnest. Carter handed Rachel her Marine cap, which had fallen in the earlier chaos. "This is yours," he said softly. "Wear it with pride. It's the only armor you'll ever need." As Rachel placed the cap on her head, she stood taller, her limp no longer a source of shame but a mark of survival. For the first time in years, she felt whole again, not as a broken veteran, but as a Marine. The ripple effect of that moment was profound. Within hours, the construction company's owner issued a public apology, pledging a week's wages to the Veteran Support Foundation. The foreman who'd led the mockery was quietly reassigned, but the real change ran deeper. Rachel was invited to speak at Jefferson High School the following week. Standing before 300 students, many of whom had never met a combat veteran, she felt the weight of their attention. Her voice was steady as she spoke. Scars aren't something to hide. They're proof you survived something meant to destroy you. They're why you're here, safe in this room. The students listened in silence, some with tears in their eyes, as her words sank in. The construction workers, shaken by the experience, enrolled in diversity and respect workshops, not out of obligation, but out of a genuine desire to change. A worker with a stutter found himself included in conversations, no longer the butt of jokes. An immigrant electrician was surprised when his coworkers asked about his family with curiosity, not disdain. The company cemented Rachel's legacy with a commemorative brick at the site's entrance, inscribed with her name and the words, "Built on Respect." It became a quiet landmark, a place where passers-by paused to reflect on the heroism that often walks unnoticed among them. The teenage girl who'd planned to post a mocking video changed her mind. Instead, she recorded a new message, looking directly into her phone's camera. "Let's make respect louder than laughter," she said, her voice firm with conviction. The video exploded online, amassing 2 million views and igniting a movement. People across Houston and beyond began sharing stories of unsung heroes in their communities. Veterans, first responders, everyday people who'd faced extraordinary challenges with quiet courage. Veterans started visiting the construction site, not for the building itself, but for the brick, bringing their own stories of sacrifice and survival, forging a new community bound by respect. Rachel stood at the heart of a Houston construction site, her prosthetic leg catching the glint of the midday sun. The dust swirled around her, kicked up by the boots of workers and the hum of machinery. But it wasn't the noise that weighed on her. It was the weight of her own story, etched into the metal and carbon fiber of her limb, a reminder of a life reshaped by war. She'd once been a Marine, fierce and unyielding, but the injury that cost her leg had left her feeling like a shadow of that warrior. Every step she took felt like an apology to a world that didn't understand her scars. Yet, in this unlikely place, surrounded by steel beams and the clatter of progress, something new was stirring. A community bound not by pity, but by respect. One that saw her not as broken, but as battle-tested. A small boy, no older than 7, approached her one afternoon, his own prosthetic arm gleaming under the Texas sky. His mother trailed behind, her eyes soft with a mix of pride and apprehension. The boy's gaze was unflinching, his voice carrying the unfiltered honesty only a child can muster. "My mom says you're like me," he said, tilting his head as if studying a puzzle. "She says maybe I can be a hero too." Rachel's heart caught in her throat. She knelt down, her prosthetic leg creaking slightly, and adjusted it so he could see it clearly. No shame, no hiding. She looked into his wide, curious eyes and saw a flicker of her younger self, the one who'd once believed in her own invincibility. "You're already a hero," she told him, her voice steady but warm, like a campfire on a cold night. "Every morning you get up, every time you face the world with that arm of yours, you're choosing courage. That's what heroes do." The boy's smile broke wide, brighter than the sun overhead, as if his joy could power the cranes towering above them. In that moment, Rachel felt something shift inside her, a spark of purpose she hadn't realized she'd lost. The construction site, once just a place of bricks and mortar, was becoming something more. Lieutenant Carter and his Navy SEAL team, grizzled men with their own scars and stories, made it a point to return every Veterans Day. They didn't come for fanfare or speeches. They came to stand quietly by the brick that had become their touchstone, a single, unassuming slab they dubbed the honor brick. For them, it was a place to reflect on the unspoken bonds forged in service, the kind that didn't need medals or parades to hold meaning. Carter, with his weathered face and eyes that had seen too much, would rest his hand on that brick. his thoughts drifting to the teammates he'd lost and the ones still fighting battles no one could see. The site had transformed into a sanctuary of sorts, a checkpoint where people learned to look deeper, past appearances, past assumptions, past the quick judgments that often cut deeper than shrapnel. The ripple effects spread beyond the site. The coffee shop across the street, its windows fogged with the steam of morning rushes, began offering free drinks to veterans and active duty service members. The gesture wasn't flashy, but it was heartfelt, a quiet nod to those who'd served. The local pharmacy followed, launching a program to help disabled veterans navigate the maze of medical supplies, from prosthetics to prescriptions. Even the teenagers who'd once trailed Rachel, snickering at her uneven gait, began to approach her differently. Their curiosity had shifted from cruelty to genuine interest, their questions about her time as a Marine, tentative but sincere. For Rachel, these small changes were seismic. She'd spent so long feeling like her injury defined her, a scarlet letter marking her as less than. But now she walked taller, her prosthetic no longer a secret to hide, but a badge of survival. She was a Marine again, not just in memory, but in the way she carried herself, in the way she refused to let the world's misunderstandings dim her light. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived, its crisp envelope bearing the seal of the National SEALs Association. Rachel's hands trembled as she opened it, her mind racing with disbelief. They wanted her to be their keynote speaker at the National Veterans Conference, to share her story of resilience and respect with warriors across the country. The girl who'd once tucked her prosthetic under long pants, who'd avoided mirrors and sidestepped questions about her injury, was now being asked to stand before heroes and inspire them. It was a call she couldn't ignore, a chance to reclaim not just her voice, but the identity she'd thought the war had stolen. 6 months later, Rachel stood on a stage in a packed auditorium, her dress blues tailored to fit her perfectly, her prosthetic leg unapologetically visible. The metal gleamed under the stage lights, a testament to her journey from shame to pride. The audience, veterans, active duty service members, and their families, watched her with a quieted intensity. She spoke from the heart, her voice steady but laced with the raw emotion of someone who'd walked through fire. "Honor isn't about how many limbs you have," she said, her words cutting through the silence like a blade. "It's about how you face the storm when the world tries to tear you apart. Don't mock scars, learn from them. They're proof someone survived what was meant to destroy them." In the front row, Lieutenant Carter sat in his dress uniform, the challenge coin he'd given Rachel years ago pinned proudly to his chest. Beside him was the now 8-year-old boy, dressed in a miniature Marine uniform his mother had bought him, his prosthetic arms swinging lightly as he clapped. His eyes shone with admiration, not just for Rachel, but for the hero he was beginning to see in himself. Carter had spoken to a reporter earlier that day, his voice gruff but certain. "Every building needs a strong foundation," he'd said. "Every community does too. Respect is that foundation. Without it, everything falls apart." His words hung over the construction site, which had long since outgrown its original purpose. The honor brick had become a pilgrimage site, drawing not just veterans but teachers, firefighters, nurses, single parents, anyone whose quiet courage went unnoticed in the grind of daily life. Local schools organized field trips to the site, where children stood before the brick and listened to Rachel's story. They learned that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear prosthetics, sometimes they limp, sometimes they carry wounds no one can see but that ache just the same. The construction company itself had changed. Its CEO, moved by the site's transformation, made a pledge that became their motto. "No one gets mocked here. Every brick reminds us of honor." And they began hiring more veterans, more people with disabilities, more individuals the world had overlooked. The site became a beacon of second chances, a place where people weren't judged by their limitations, but by their resilience. Rachel's mailbox filled with letters from children, veterans, and others whose lives had been touched by her story. One, from a teenage girl who'd lost her leg in a car accident, was just a single line: "You gave me hope to stand tall again." Rachel read it over and over, each word a brick in the foundation of her new purpose. At the Houston intersection where the site stood, the air had changed. Where jeers once rang out, conversations about service and sacrifice now bloomed. A teenage girl who'd once mocked Rachel had undergone her own transformation, trading her cruel comments for a nonprofit called Respect Stories. Her social media, once a platform for gossip, now shared videos of unsung heroes, ordinary people with extraordinary courage. The videos had racked up over 50 million views, each one a testament to the power of stories to shift perspectives. As Rachel finished her speech at the Veterans Conference, she held up the challenge coin Carter had given her that day at the construction site. Her voice was steady, but her eyes glistened with the weight of the moment. "This coin isn't mine," she said. "It belongs to everyone who chooses courage over comfort, who stands when others sit, who builds bridges where walls once stood." The applause that followed roared for 7 minutes, a wave of sound that carried her forward. Later, as she walked through the conference center, her prosthetic clicking confidently on the marble floor, Rachel thought back to that dusty construction site. She thought of the black SUVs that had rolled in, carrying Carter and his team, carrying the moment when honor became more than a word. Some scars tell stories of survival. Some wounds become windows to wisdom. And sometimes the strongest foundations are built not from concrete or steel, but from respect for the warriors who walk quietly among us, their courage a light that never fades.